I'm Samita. I'm from the Nashua Public Library, and I just wanted to give a little introduction to the program that we're having today. So, in this virtual workshop, we're going to hear from child development and early literacy specialist Stefanie Paige Wieder and Nashua Family Network parent Jennice Chewlin about how you can directly influence your child's evolving self of self by reading together. And I'm going to give it to them so they can talk about their presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so Jennice, do you want to introduce yourself and then I'll introduce myself?
Sure, I'll start by saying thank you and welcome everyone for attending today's session. Stefanie and I are really excited that you're here. And I'll introduce myself first. As Sumita mentioned, my name is Jennice Chewlin, and I'm here because I wear a couple hats. One is I'm a public health champion, and there's a huge intersection with public health and early childhood literacy that I'm very vested in because I'm a mother. I have 4 kiddos, and I obviously have a lot of desires to keep reading with them. So I'm so excited to bring this topic here to Nashua Library. And then lastly, I'm also a Nashua Family Network member, and they're an organization here that was started from Smart Start Coalition. We're a parent-led group here in Nashua that doesn't want to leave any parent feeling like they're alone on this parenthood journey. And if you are looking for connection in the community, they're a great resource. Thank you, Stefanie. I'll throw it over to you.
Thank you, Jennice. I'm so happy that we're partnering together on this. So I'm Stefanie Wieder. I live in Nashua. I have a young daughter. So my interest in this topic is as a parent and also professionally. I've been in the world of children's book publishing for over 10 years. I'm a child development specialist. And so this is a topic that I've presented on many times and am super interested in, and just really, really happy to be bringing it to the local community. So, and I love going to the Nashua Public Library. So I feel really special to be able to host on their platform. So we asked you this, we asked you already, why are you here? And you shared with us. So thank you. And there's another response we haven't seen yet. More twins?
I should mention I'm a twin mom too. So there's 3 of us on this.
I feel so outnumbered. That's great. Yeah. All right. So hopefully we'll share some good tips. And because it's a webinar, you cannot come off mute, but we really invite you to put thoughts, comments, conversation in the chat anytime. We'll keep it open and be looking at it. So,
yes.
So we're here because picture books and all of the media that children consume represent characters in certain ways. And these representations might be subtle or they might be really in your face. But all of us, including children, take in these messages, and over time, these messages can help form a child's sense of self and their sense of other people too.
So what messages are books sending? And the thought behind this is, when you're reading books to your children, you're looking for books that show, hey, you belong, look at this book. Or books can sometimes also have characters in it or show stories where maybe you don't feel like you belong, or there isn't a lot of representation. So you don't have this feeling, well, I can become anything I want to, because you actually see that reflected in the books you're reading. And I know, Steph, you had a very good point that you wanted to share here about the importance of children receiving messages about themselves. Did you want to share that?
Sure. On this slide in particular? Yeah, and I know I experienced this as a child to some degree, being Jewish, and maybe you here in the audience have experienced it, but, books can give kids the message like, you belong, you don't belong, or you can be anything you want to be, or no, you can't do that. So they're receiving messages about who they can be, what they can do, what their entire cultural group is like, and messages that shape their opinions about the worth of other people as well. So, and there's actually a pretty well-established theory on this. Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop is a distinguished scholar of children's literature, and she wrote that books serve as windows and mirrors for children. And so this is exactly what we have been saying. It means that children can both learn about others and see themselves in reflected in what we read to them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this is okay. Sorry, Steph, for a minute there, I got confused. But going along with this, the mirrors and sliding doors and windows, my experience as a parent reading to young children is that I have experienced both sides. I've been able to read a story that mirrored for me a word that my father experienced. So what I mean by that is, in this book on the left, Planting Stories, when I read that book gave me a word that I had been missing my whole life. I didn't know what my dad's experience was, that there was a word for it, and that he's a mainland American. Excuse me, let me start again. That he's a first generation mainland American, meaning he left Puerto Rico and his family left Puerto Rico and he was born in Florida. So that's a mainland American. And this story gave the experience of Pura Belpre and her life and her desire. And I was so excited because for the first time, I finally got to understand what the word was for the experience that my dad went through. So that was the mirror experience. And then jumping over to Pink and Say, this is a book that I read to my elementary age student, child, not student, who this book taught us was a window into empathy. The story of Pink and Say touched my heart so much while reading that I began to cry. I was so moved by the story and this friendship and the ending that I really got to experience what the friend who lost someone really felt like. So it was what we would call a window, right, Steph, in that example. So I wanted to share that with you.
And I don't know if you saw the comment from
Oh
Victoria
my gosh.
in the chat.
Victoria, original Pink and Say from 5th grade. I just read this in the last 3 months. I didn't know about Pink and Say. And
I didn't know about it until now. I'm going to have to look at it.
You have to look at it. It's a very touching story.
What's it about, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it's during the Civil War, these two young boys were soldiers, and one was really young and didn't want to be fighting anymore, but was injured, and Pink saved him from his, he was basically dying, and so he brought him back to, helped his mom and him helped cure him and bring him back to being able to walk. And it's just a beautiful story of how things work out and how stories get remembered. Do people keep talking about it, or do they get forgotten? And so that was what was so beautiful about it.
I love that.
This is going to
by
Nick Boyd. Yes, with your 6th grader. I read it to my 3rd grader, so I think it's good. Okay, let's talk about bias. Now, I want to kind of contain the word here based on what we're talking about and young kids, and we'll get more into that in just a minute. But the most basic definition of bias is that it's an conscious or unconscious preference. And we all have them. It's part of human nature. So I wanted to we're going to explain that and then dive a little deep about that. We have implicit bias, things that we're unaware of, and explicit bias, things that we're very much aware of. And what they both have in common is that they both have the same impact and they both can be changed. So we'll talk about that in just a minute. We wanted to highlight that bias is normal, it's human nature, and it's good that we know this information. So if you've ever visited the Nashua Library, you see how they have this big wall here, and they have this program called 1000 Books Before Kindergarten. And this program demonstrates that young children who are read to on a regular basis have an advantage when learning to read for themselves. So all these handprints are children who have been read to or reading themselves 1000 books before kindergarten. And we wanted to highlight that we're doing that because we want to have and support our children the best way possible, right? We know that reading to them is going to give them an advantage, so we all support that. And so knowing the information, the science behind this, we change our behavior. We encourage reading. We have these programs that invite young families with young children to participate, to encourage their participation. And that all stems from because we know the science behind it and we want the best for our kids. You can go ahead to the next slide. So knowing about how early bias starts is going to be helpful. And Steph is going to get into that in just a minute. But before we do, how many of us have heard, or if you want to admit too, have said, I don't see color when talking about ethnicities and races and even different abilities? It's something that I have heard many times. And I know that I'm maybe from a generation that is on the tail end of learning this phrase, that saying, I don't see color is a way to think that everyone is equal. We all look the same. It's okay. When in reality, that's actually harmful and problematic. And Steph is going to go into that in just a bit. But this is something that I have heard a few instances, which we'll unpack in just a moment. Steph, did you want to say why this is actually problematic?
Sure. Yeah, and I have a question for you if you don't mind, but have people actually said that to you, like as a way of trying to relate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
they have. And it's
Yeah.
well-intentioned, but still has impact, because I know that statement means more than what is said. And we're going to talk about what that more is.
Right. And so I'm preaching to the choir here because I'm seeing, some of you have gotten this, you've heard this. So the problem with it is, so it's well intended. And I, as a parent, when I was touring schools, when I was pregnant, I heard school directors say this when I got here. So I know it's in the air. So it's problematic because it erases each person's individuality, first of all. But second of all, it leaves way too much room for those unconscious biases to impact how we act. And they can impact children, whether it's in our own bias with the books we're choosing for them, or the bias that's actually baked into the books themselves. Just, in keeping in the scope of this webinar, it's baked into lots of other things too, but that's what we're going to focus on is the books. And like Jennice said, this isn't, trying to blame anyone or say, hey, because everyone has bias. It's research-based, just like those 1000 books. And there's actually a pretty solid body of evidence that the bias starts young. So I'm wondering if you can take a guess in the chat of what we know for sure based on research, the age at which children demonstrate bias. What would be your guess? And if you've heard this, don't guess. But if you're just, put it out there. How old are kids when we know they first develop bias? Five. It's a good guess. Yeah. Any other guesses? Bias? Maybe you guys. Yep. Guess what age we know for sure children demonstrate bias? 5 is a good guess. We actually used to think it was 2. And then a couple of years ago, researchers at the University of Toronto demonstrated that it's 6 months old. So they show a preference towards individuals that match the race of their caregiver, which actually makes total sense, right? That caregiver is familiar and hopefully safe. So it's natural that they would develop a preference. So we have developed preferences from basically the moment we're born. So we have them, like there's no question. It's just, what are they? And so bias can be towards or against any group of people. It's not just about race. So if you happen to be curious about your own biases, and I was, you can take online questionnaires and find out what they are. And so there's a resource. If you Google Project Implicit, you can choose from lots of different questionnaires to assess your unconscious bias against, towards or against various cultural, religious groups, even body size, LGBTQ. There are so many options on there because your own unconscious biases are almost certainly impacting which books and media you're choosing for your kids. And children's books, unfortunately, have a really long history of excluding entire categories of people and portraying groups of people in stereotypical and harmful ways. The publishing industry is aware of this, and now, and I would say in the last 10 years has been making a huge effort to repair this, but change has been slow. So this image on the slide shows the percentage of books in 2018 that depicted each type of character shown in the illustration. So starting on the left, American Indian, First Nation people, Latinx people, Asian people, Black people, animals, and then white people. So what do you notice about this image? And you can go ahead and put your thoughts in the chat. Both about sort of the numbers and what the numbers are saying and what the image is showing too. Yeah, exactly. How are there so many books about animals? How are there more books about animals than all of the children of color put together? And that is just the way it was. And I guarantee before 2018, it was worse. Yep, like Victoria said, people would rather talk about animals than Black and brown children. Yeah, and this is even only looking at race. It's not even considering like disabilities, family structures, other things like that. So you can imagine, you know, how many children are not being represented. If you look at the illustration, you see all the way on the right, this white child is like surrounded by mirrors. There's even a disco ball which has mirrors in every direction. So he is thinking like he is it, you know, like he is so affirmed. Like he has so many possibilities. As you go down and you see the mirrors getting smaller and smaller and smaller, the children of color have very narrow and incomplete ways of viewing themselves, their communities, and even their possibilities. They're at risk of feeling less important and less normal than their white peers.
We have one more comment. Kids love
Yeah.
more animals and is a lot books about it, a lot more books about it, and they find it more attractive. Okay.
That's an interesting perspective. So you're thinking kids, the reason for this is kids really like animals. Yeah. And they like those books for sure. I mean, there is nothing wrong with books about animals at all. Books about animals are great. It's important though to have a lot of books, as many books about people. And publishers are just based on what we know about research. And so publishers are reflecting this too in what they're publishing. But we'll go back to that point. That's a good point. So as you can see in 2018, sorry, 50% of the children's books published depicted white characters, 27% depicted animals or non-humans, and 23% depicted children of color. So this is how things stood in 2022. It's a little hard to parse this image because they didn't do cool illustrations like in the last one. But the good news is things have improved. So instead of 50% of books having a main character who's white, now it's 29%. And if you were to add up the bubbles, you'd find that 39% of books have at least one BIPOC primary character compared to 23% in 2018. So it's really great to see this progress, but this image now has added some other groups, and you can see that some of them are really quite underrepresented here. So it's great that there's progress, and there's still a long way to go because of course there are Indigenous children, there are children with same-sex parents, there are children from non-Christian families. So
thanks for making that case, Stefanie, and showing us, highlighting a little bit about the publishing company and where we're going, where we're headed towards, which is we're hoping to see more diverse and inclusive books. So it kind of lends itself to this part. Well, why? Why is it important that there are diverse and inclusive books? So that image with the mirror, where it was a really small mirror on the left, and then as you went to the right, it was a larger mirror. Couldn't you tell that that little child on the right, the white boy, felt so affirmed and proud? I mean, teeth grinning. And we want, coming as a parent and a community member, I want all children to feel that way. And so books are a very important piece of that. And jumping also back to the slide that says, I don't see color, that's not true, right? Like, we are different. And thank goodness. I actually asked my 12-year-old, why do you think it's important to have diverse books? And she said something that I remember saying when she was little, and she said, well, because it would be boring if we all looked the same. And that is true. I mean, we live in a world that's diverse. And so we're also concerned with our children getting a full rounded education and making sure that they're growing up in a way that is wholesome. And this is part of it. And the reason why it's part of it is because our world is different.
are you okay with me going to the next slide, Jennice? I didn't
Yes,
ask.
please.
Okay.
Yes. So earlier, when we were talking about mirrors and windows, our sense of self and who we are, I love this photo. Thank you for sharing it. It's adorable. We can see our sense of self can either be a positive or negative experience, and books can help us affirm ourselves or also feel really low about ourselves. I am reading a book to my elementary student now about the Japanese internment camps, where we're reading, they call this Enemies. And in the book, this is another example of seeing a window into this person's life, of how when they went to school and they were looking at the history books, trying to find where it said that, they were placed in internment camps, and it wasn't there. It made them as a small child feel terrible. Like, you erased a huge, awful part of my history here. And I share that because that's how one way books can make us have this negative sense of self, but also this, when there are stories and characters that look like you or have diverse settings, culture, languages, then it makes you feel affirmed. And so you get to have this sense of normalcy. Am I missing anything on that, Steph?
And just to say that, and you guys probably know this, but kids are receiving messages from wherever they go in the world, from school, from when they go to Target to, to their doctor's office. They're getting messages about whether they belong or not all the time. And so books play a super important role in either amplifying these messages or countering them. And most of the time, for kids from underrepresented groups, we really need to counter the messages that they're getting from mainstream society and elevate them and show them how important and worthy they are. And as we mentioned before, another reason to read diverse and inclusive books is that they help build empathy. And empathy, Jennice and I were talking with this, and she made the good point that empathy is not the same as feeling sorry for someone. Empathy, as I would define it, is the ability to put yourself in someone else's shoes and imagine what they might be feeling. And so diverse books help kids understand other perspectives. And research tells us that this is actually super important. There are some major research studies that show that emotional intelligence in kindergarten is way more predictive of success in life, like graduation rates, holding a job, than IQ. Like, it doesn't matter how smart you are. It matters more how much you can understand feelings and understand other people. So diverse and inclusive books really do a great job of that. And really, though, the main thing that they can do, because they don't do it alone, is open up conversations. So we can talk to kids about similarities and differences, how they feel about themselves, how they view others. And kids are naturally really like open and blunt. And so books are a great tool for us. But I just wanted to share an example of last year. I was in the YMCA locker room, changing room with my daughter, who was 3 at the time. And a woman came in a wheelchair, and my daughter asked really loudly, "What is she riding? She can't walk?" And, it's like the instinct is like, "Oh my God, you're so embarrassing," right? But it was a teachable moment. And so, I had 2 options. I could say, "That's rude," and not say anything else. And then what message would she take away from that? Or I could say, "Oh, everybody's body is different, and some people need a wheelchair to get around." And then maybe we could follow up and read some books that show that. So anytime a child in our life asks a question or makes a statement about a group of people or a person, this is a chance for us to learn more about what they believe. Because as we know, as research tell us, they have all sorts of false information. They've been developing stereotypes. So we shared the research about kids who are 6 months old. There's research that children who are 2 years old have developed stereotypes about groups of people. So it's actually our job. I mean, do you remember growing up, like saying a word wrong for so many years and not knowing you were saying it wrong? Like for me, it was like lingerie and lingerie. I thought they were different words. I didn't get it until 6th grade when I was in Macy's, and I was like, oh. So, but it's like that. Like you can have these beliefs about people. Kids have these like wrong, incorrect ideas. So when we're reading diverse and inclusive books with them, we can hear what they're saying and ask them questions, and we'll give you tips in a minute for how to talk to them about the books. And then it's so important to gently correct their wrong ideas and to talk explicitly about things like race, culture, religion. Give them the vocabulary, use the words, help them talk about these things. Don't make it taboo. It can be uncomfortable, but it's important. We'll provide some resources on that. So a couple ways to approach conversations around diverse and inclusive books are to start by asking kids about themselves. And this is especially true with your younger kids, toddlers, 2, 3 years old. Oh, what color are your eyes? Hey, what holidays do we celebrate? Do we celebrate, Easter? What does this child celebrate? And then you can ask questions about the book. What do you notice about this character? Hey, why do you think the character did that? So as you can see, these questions are all open-ended. They're questions that are like who, how, why, what, because they encourage kids to respond with more than just a one-word answer. So open-ended questions when you're reading a book are a great way to get kids talking.
So Steph, I'm just going to read a comment here since we went through those slides. Marinelli says that this picture takes me back when I was a volunteer in my girls' library class. One of my twins chose a book with the cover, a girl with curly hair, and she sees herself in this book and says, she told me, "Mommy, she looks like me."
Oh, so nice.
And it is beautiful to have curly hair.
Yeah.
And I think that that's beautiful. Reading that, Marinelli, I know you must have felt so proud for her that she got to see a character that reflected her. And that is what's special. And I love how also Stefanie is sharing that, well, not all the books that you are maybe reading are going to be mirrors. It's also windows into new cultures or new family systems, new religions and places of work, etc. And that's the beautiful piece. Now, Stefanie is right that it's not always easy to have these conversations. And I just wanted to affirm that I'm with you. You're not alone in this process, and everyone here has mentioned that they're here because they know how they want to be more inclusive, and they may be already doing it and they want some new ideas and tips. So that's great. Keep doing that. And here are some tips, some tools that I have used. And the biggest takeaway for me is once I learned this, it has been so powerful for our family. is when they are asking a question and it's something we don't know, following up with, I don't know, let's find out, has been such a beautiful statement, because it kind of hooks us together to, let's go to the library and let's go find out about this. And I am not the best, I don't have the best memory with so many things running around. Maybe you all can agree.
Mm-hmm.
So I started a notes section in my phone of like, okay, when I go to the library, these are the things we want to follow up on. But I also use Sesame Street and PBS Kids as resources for me to learn how to talk with my kids. And Stefanie has a wonderful resource that we're going to share at the end of the webinar. I just wanted to highlight some of the things that I use, especially as a family. We're a multicultural family. So within our family, we look very differently. We have, different skin tones, different hair textures, different music. And so these are the resources that I have leaned on to affirm our family's representation and how varied it is.
Thank you so much. Yeah. When I was looking for images on this, I saw that Sesame Workshop has entire, suites of resources on talking about race with kids and things like that.
And if you have a resource that you use, please put it in the chat. We'd love to know and grow our list of resources.
Definitely. And I love that idea of the notes in your phone. So I'm going to start doing that. So, all right. So how do you know which books to pick? Walking into a bookstore or the library can be a little overwhelming. It's like, woo, where to start, right? So we're going to provide some just basic guidelines for how you can pick good, diverse and inclusive books, because not all of them are created equal. Even if they're in the bookstore or even if they're in the library. So the first just basic thing, like, is it a good book? Is it age appropriate for your kid? That's number one. Is it interesting? Is it a good story? Are the illustrations artistic and inviting? So this is a spread from a book called Barefoot Books, Children of the World. And kids, I have seen kids just pour over this image of different children with different bodies. It's beautifully painted. So look to make sure it's a good book. It doesn't really matter if it's a diverse book, if it's a terrible book. And I'm going to hand it over to Jennice to continue just what you were saying before about looking for diverse human characters.
Mm-hmm. So we talked about how the book with animal characters certainly have their place. But it's also important that we're picking out books in your home library, or the books you're renting or purchasing feature diverse human characters too. One is to be a mirror, right? There should be books out there that represent your type of family. And that again is affirming that we all have different family structures. Where we're living is maybe different. So human characters in different living spaces, islands or rural, urban. It's really important to have that, because again, you're looking for ways to affirm your child and say, like, look, this is like us, this is like our town. And then also saying, wow, this is really different. Or, they have two dads. This character has two dads. Do we have two dads? No, we don't. And again, you might be feeling like, oh no, is that taboo? Should I not say that? It's accurate. This book has two dads and your family doesn't. And so it's okay to have this conversation. It may be a little bit different than what we have been taught or growing up with about not speaking these things, but we're here to affirm that it's okay. So that's what I wanted to say. Stefanie, thank you.
Yeah, and this interior is of a book that has a child character with two dads, and it's a multiracial family. It's called Baby's First Words. And it's a word book that happens to have a multiracial family with two dads.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to look out for stereotypes. Now, fortunately, this book is not in the collection of the Nashua Public Library, but it is still around. So this book, when it was published, which I believe was in the 1950s, was one of the only books representing Chinese people in children's literature. So needless to say, it perpetuated all sorts of stereotypes, you know, and if you were Chinese, would you want to be seen this way with like the body language, the closed eye smiles, the yellow skin, stereotypical hairstyles, everyone being identical? It just perpetuates old, deeply embedded stereotypes, and it's so far removed from people's own cultural realities. So, you know, check the language and illustrations. If you're not sure if the characters are stereotypical, you know, think about how has this group historically been, you know, what are historical associations? And the danger of stereotypes, of course, is that they're totally incomplete. So, you know, a stereotype about Native Americans might be, and often was, that their clothing is made of animal hide and they have feathers in their hair. And that doesn't leave any room for present day Native people who wear jeans and t-shirts, you know. And so the stereotype contributes to harmful myths that certain groups of people exist only in history. You know, they're not even here anymore. So authors and illustrators are telling their own stories more and more, which is a really important first step in breaking down stereotypes. So that's something you're going to look for too, which I'll get to in a couple more slides. And as we've mentioned a few times, you know, check if the book is a window or a mirror. This book, called From My Window, is literally about a child who's looking out his window in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro. And it's showing what his world is like in this, you know, very particular community in the world. So most children in this country who are reading about this will be learning, you know, this is a window, but there might be some aspects that feel familiar to them as well. So just ask yourself, you know, will children learn about themselves or other people in the book? Is the information accurate? Now, this is kind of similar to, does it perpetuate stereotypes? It can be a little bit hard to know, but it's super important because we want to be giving our kids accurate information, right? So if the book talks explicitly about a certain group of people, it should be specific and precise in its presentation. So going back to the example of Native American characters, it should include details about the particular tribe or tribes being represented, as opposed to lumping all Native American people and customs into one category. And that's true with every culture. So the book you see here is called A Gift for Amma, and it's about a girl who looks for a gift for her mother in a market where she lives in Chennai, India, which is in the southern part of India. India itself is a really diverse country, and markets in this region of India in the book are different than markets in other regions. This book was written by someone from this part of the world, so she had the authority to write this book. And so when you're looking at books, think about who created it, who's the author, who's the illustrator. Usually there's a little blurb about them in the book. Do they come from the culture or group that they're depicting? And if they don't, okay, but what qualifies them to create this book sensitively, accurately, and without bias? So publishers are now working more and more with authors and illustrators who can represent their own backgrounds, or books created by people who have lived experience with the culture being depicted. And so those books I have seen them all over the place at Nashua Public Library, thank you, including the books that are here on this slide. These are all books that are created by people who have the lived experience to be creating them with authority.
Can I just say one thing about
yeah, of course.
going back to the authors? That's one of my ways of kind of checking, like, is this book going to be accurate and depict and learn from it, right? Or use it as a mirror. I do go back to the authors of the back flap and I see who wrote it. And when I feel like, oh yeah, okay, so they had this experience as a child and they're writing about it, or this is a story told for many generations and they're finally printing it out, I do feel it checks off my box to move forward, that this book does meet my requirements.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for that. Now, this is another important point that I referenced earlier. Just like we don't want to show a group of people who lived only in history at a certain point of time, it's important to look for books that just show lots of different people doing normal day-to-day things. You know, historical books are great. books about, traditional tales are great, but if that's the only thing your child or children are seeing about certain cultures, it gives them a really distorted view because everyone also exists today. This image is from a really cute book called Dump Truck Disco, where the truck construction vehicles build an inclusive playground. And here it is at the end with all the kids in the community playing on the inclusive playground. And so you can see they're just all here playing on the playground. And there's lots of different types of kids here. There's even a child seeking, shelter in a tent to reduce some of the sensory stimulation. So depicting all children, but especially underrepresented children doing everyday things is really important for normalizing differences and helping children feel seen. And so if you're not sure where to find diverse and inclusive books that are actually good quality, here are some resources. There are just blogs out there, people who can be trusted. So a couple of the big ones are We Need Diverse Books. That's easy to remember too, just like We Need Diverse Books. If you go there, they have a lot of lists of diverse books. Some of the others listed here are if you're looking for specific groups about specific cultures. Also, as Jennice mentioned, you're going to get a link to a handout at the end that gives you some criteria for selecting books. But your most important resource is the Nashua Public Library. And they're going to say a few words about how they can help you with this.
Hi. That was fun listening to it, and I wanted to chime in the middle about how you said I don't see color, and I was like, yep, I have heard that before. So if you come to the library, the staff is always happy to provide book recommendations, and if you're not sure what you're looking for exactly, we always ask follow-up questions to get down to exactly what you want. Parents can also submit purchase suggestions. So if you feel there's a book that we really need, we don't have, you're more than welcome to go to our website and go to our contact us page, and we have a form where you can submit suggestions. And as long as they fit our collection development policy, we are more than happy to buy them. We have displays at the library, and we always try to make sure that our displays are inclusive and they have a diverse, the books that we're showcasing are diverse, and not only are the books diverse, but the topics are also diverse. And then another tool that we have on our website is called a novel list, which it has a number of books and book lists that you can look up to see if it's sort of to look up any topic of books that you wanted, which are by themes or tones or subjects. And then we're always happy to we're always learning and growing. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. That's great. A wealth of information. I mean, obviously, people had announced they're from other areas than Nashua, but check in with your local library. They are there. They're helpful. They're there to be a mirror, right, and window for the community. And I'd love to share my experience. With my eldest daughter, who's 12. She's at that tween stage, so children's books weren't working for her, and she wasn't ready for adult novels. So I was able to go to you, Samita. Do you remember?
Yeah, I remember she read front desk, and then she came back for the book club. She was my first book club attendee, and we spent an hour talking about it. I liked the book, she liked the book, and she read more of the series than me.
She did, and it was because of you that we approached you, Sumita, and we said, listen, we're looking for books that highlight a girl of color as the main character. However, we want this to have a positive story. It's not historical or negative, awful life. We want this to be a different kind of read. And you came out with 8 to 9 selections for her. And I was like, so I wanted to, give some cheers and props to the Nashua Public Library. And I've also ordered books, like I've also gone to the context page and say, hey, this isn't in your selection. You know, can you order it? And it happened twice. I got 2 different books. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Yay, Samita here in the chat box.
That's so nice to hear. I love that. And I'm chuckling as I think about the books I've asked Kat to help me find for my daughter. I'm like, we need books, nonfiction books about the moon, Mars, tigers. So, but she's much younger.
I love that.
And she found them for us. So you guys are awesome.
Oh, we love the book suggestions about, can we get trash books, like trash truck trash books and recycling track books? And it's so much fun.
I know a few good ones of those. You guys are interested. So, but that's great. So we'd like to open it up now for Q&A if anyone has, or just comments and just a conversation. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And Samita just put in the chat the link to this handout, which on one side is the tips that we shared for how to select diverse and inclusive books, and the other side is actually a quiz. So it was originally designed for teachers, but parents can use it, and it's to audit your book collection, whether it's books you take out from the library or books you have at home. And it's asking specific questions about the types of characters represented, just to see how full a picture you're giving your child of the world.
Yeah, it's a great resource. I wish I had this a long time ago. It encapsulates everything that we're talking about here in an easy way to use. So thank you.
And I just want to say too, because I said this to Jennice, like as a professional, I'm like, oh yeah, you should use this, you should do that. As a parent, the truth is, I'm lucky because I worked for a children's book publishing company that creates diverse and inclusive books. So I have a lot of them at home, but it's not easy to, do this intentionally. And so, yeah, it's not like, oh, okay.
Yeah, well, and let's highlight and normalize that.
Yeah,
we can get this wrong. We might get a book that definitely, pushes stereotypes. And, we should probably, Stefanie, talk about as parents, like, how do we recover from that? What's the conversation to our child? I think it does depend on the age, but it goes back to those open-ended questions like, oh, do you think everyone really looks like that? Well, what about abuelo? He's from Cuba. Not everyone does that. That's how I have been able to break that. Oops, we got a book that does that.
Exactly. So my daughter is Asian and Jewish, and I got a book that was highly recommended on Amazon called Eyes That Kiss in the Corners, and I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome, and I got it, and I was like, darn, this doesn't apply to my family at all. Like it's about having like biological relatives who all look the same, and that's not my family. So I almost returned it, and then I was like, you know what? Why don't we read it and just talk about how some families are like this, but it was kind of hard for me to decide as a parent, if I wanted to show my child something that was going to be confusing to her or not. But I think you're right. The key is to just talk about it. They're going to come across this stuff anyway, whether we show them or not.
Definitely. We have a question in the chat that do you have suggestions about talking with your child's educators about this? How to best advocate for this in school? Because yes, at a certain age, they're spending more time at school, obviously. This is good. I will quickly just say what I did this year is we had a new teacher at my son's school, and I brought her books that were diverse and inclusive. And I said, I'd love to contribute to your class library. That was my way of doing that. And then perusing through to be like, okay, what books are here? That's how I did it. But I'd love to hear your stand, Stefanie.
Yeah. And actually, Kat, I'm super curious to hear what you did do or what you're thinking of doing, because you're, as knowledgeable about this topic as Jennice and I are. So I'm sure whatever ideas you have are good ones. But I agree with Jennice that especially since you're in a position where you're really familiar with books, as a librarian, you could say like, hey, I was wondering if you'd be interested in me curating some books for your classroom, volunteer and offer to put some in. You could even share the guide that we provided here. Say, I went to a professional development workshop or a parent workshop. I thought this might interest you, kind of thing. It is tricky, right? As a parent, you don't want to put your child's educators on the defense, but you could also share some professional development resources with them if it felt comfortable. Michelle likes this idea. She's going to donate some titles. You can also, Kat, suggest that they do like, so I know the company that I used to work for, Barefoot Books, does school book fairs as fundraisers for programs. And if they do that, their books are going to be diverse and inclusive because that's the only kind of books they publish. So that's another thought too, is look into having like a book fair from a place like Barefoot Books. Anyone else have ideas of how to handle that? I've actually, as a parent, never been in a position to, actually I have. I've given them books.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. At the beginning of each school year, I'm like, here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I give them books.
It's one way of doing that. And I love, the suggestion, just donate some titles to my kids' preschool. Sometimes it's as simple of an act like that. And then in your home library, kind of doing doing this, like going through and kind of auditing your home library based on this resource, I think is also a good step, because you're going to pick up on some things that maybe you can share that insight with your school provider, your school educator. So I have a question, Stefanie, and as others, you can type in questions or comments about any of the information we shared. And this again is like, it might feel like there's a lot of pressure on us as parents to get it right. You mentioned that. And this is true, right? It feels like there's a lot of pressure. I gotta do this right. And I talked a little bit about the, oops, I got it wrong one time. How would you handle if a child brings home a book from school or picks out a book from the library that doesn't meet your criteria? What are the suggestions for that?
This is where the conversations are really important. So, and they are going to come across books that are not, checking the boxes in the way they want to. They perpetuate a stereotype. And I would recommend doing exactly what you did when you mentioned like, hey, does your will like say this or look like that, and just encourage them to build those critical thinking skills so that as they get older, when they're in middle school, they're like asking their own questions. The best tool we can give them is critical thinking. So teaching them how to ask questions about books and evaluate their media and evaluate the sources that they're reading from a very young age. Like, do you think that's true? Why or why not? What makes you think that? What evidence do we have that that's true? In your own life.
Yeah, that's good stuff. Thanks for that feedback. Marianelli says, how I can help my kids to build a library, advice how to organize their books every time. We're going out, we end up with a couple books, or when we're going to the library, they love to choose 2 or more books. The diversity of books would be a good idea, or anyone can give a recommendation of advice. So how to build a home library?
Let's see. So I think there's a few questions in here.
And we have a couple minutes.
Yeah, they love to choose a couple of books. So I know what you mean. Like, your kids are going to choose their books. You can't choose them for them. One thing that you can do too is just use your time at the library. So I know when I'm with my daughter at the library, like she'll have certain books like she wants to take them home, but I will be like, okay, let's read this one, and we'll sit down and read one that I chose. So at least she's getting the exposure, to that book. So you can also like read books with them wherever you are. I'm not sure I totally understand the question about organizing their books.
Right. I think like I'm lost with too many books. I think like your home library maybe is so large, then you're renting and it's a lot. And what are some tips with staying organized, especially with your library books, not mixing them up with your home library books? which
Yeah.
is an issue for us. I try to have a special bag or what we call a cajon, like a box, a crate, and these are library books only to stay organized. That's how I would do it. So to not mix is like, this is only library books, or upstairs in their room is only home library books. Like our books, I should say.
That's a good idea. Keep them on one floor or one part of the house versus another part of the house.
Yeah, that tends to help.
Like
It's just advice. To try to separate it.
Yeah.
And
I love that you have so many books that you need to organize them.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I have like a ton of books and I have not tried to organize them.
Yeah.
So, but that's great. So
well,
we are
we're
at time.
On time.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone so much for joining us here today. It was such a pleasure to be here with you and share ideas.
Yes, thank you everyone for your insight, and for the Nashua Public Library for hosting us and this partnership. And we value everyone who came here today to learn.